Welcome back to another episode of The Hip. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where every single week I bring you a leader from our sector to discuss some of the biggest challenges in UK housing today. Today on The Hip, we were delighted to be joined by Angela Mansell, Managing Director of Mansell Building Solutions. We talk at length about Angela's passion about growing Manchester, the MMC solution, her factory in Bolton, and how she thinks that she's got a solution to the housing crisis. She also talks at length about what it's like to run a second-generation business and how she's proud of the work that they've been doing with some of their key partners and some of the case studies that they've had on the back of it. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. Angela, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm excited. It's absolutely raining and miserable in Manchester, as always. So there we go.
I know. I've just had to run outside and ask the lads outside to stop using noisy equipment. This over the road, they're having some work done. I'm like, I'm recording a podcast. Can you just stop?
Love it. Well, this has been in the diary for a while, so I'm looking forward to it. But as we always like to start, just give us a bit of introduction to yourself, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I'm Angela Mansell and I'm MD of Mansell Building Solutions. We're a specialist contractor based out in Horwich, in Bolton, and we have got two parts to our business. We have an off-site factory where we make category 2 panels, so light gauge steel frame panels, and then we create the structure of buildings on site, and we stick with the structure, and we dry line, finish, fire protect that structure right the way through. So when you're thinking about Building Safety Act and golden thread, our USP is we build a structure and we want to stick with it.
Nice. Love that. Very succinct. And talk to us a little bit about the potted history, because I know it's your dad's firm. Give us a bit of the background, just a bit of history of the business.
Yeah, so my dad set the business up in 1991, so we're over 30 years old, which for a specialist in construction, you know, is some pedigree and is some track record. So I'd like to think between us all, we're doing something right. So my dad was a QS by trade. He set up on his own in the 80s. It was back in the day where you were working for a specialist contractor and the likes of Wimpy would come along and say, go on, Ted, you're good at what you're doing. Why don't you set up on your own? We'll give you some work. In fact, I'm talking about the 80s like that was something different, but actually that still goes on now. But so Ted set up on his own, QS by trade, and he started to grow his business. And in the early in the 90s and into the 2000s, the business started to grow off the back of some of the brownfield regeneration that we saw then. So the mills, Urban Splash in particular, Mansell's were involved with a lot of those mill conversions and the dry lining element of those, the creating of the mills into apartments. And my dad used that as a springboard to kind of grow the business. And we became known as one of the largest, the biggest dry lining subby as we were then. I hate that word. We'll pick up on that in a bit. But, you know, he became a big dry lining subcontractor, plastering contractor as we moved into dry lining. And, you know, off the business went, and that's what we did. The business sort of grew. I got involved in the business in 2002. I'd been working in travel. I left uni. I've got a history degree. I left uni and went to work for Air Tours. I'm sorry, I'm recording a podcast, but thanks for the brew. You'll have to cut that bit. Cut it out.
Yeah, it's fine. I was like, where's mine?
I know, that's service. So start again. So I joined the business in 2002. Yeah. And I was working for Air Tours in a sales and marketing role after graduating from Manchester Uni with a history degree. And I left Air Tours because the planes hit the Twin Towers. So 2001, there was that dramatic and awful event, but that sent travel into free fall. So my role it got made redundant 3 times. And I was at a point in my life where I'd taken out a big mortgage and kind of needed some job security that travel couldn't give me at the time. And my dad had always said to me, construction's no place for women. And, you know, he'd always been adamant that I wouldn't get involved in his business. And I think he was saying that not because he wasn't kind of switched on to the equality piece, I think it was more out of protection, because I think in the 80s and 90s, construction wasn't a particularly nice place to be. I don't think it was a great place to be as a man, let alone a woman. But what I think he started to see emerge in the sort of 2000s and late 90s was, he actually said to me, he's like, listen, there's more girl QSs I'm seeing these days. And do you know what? They're pretty good. He's like, so maybe there is something you can come and do for us. And so I joined Dad's business in a procurement role. So he was, wanted some security and understanding around the supply chain, who we work with, best value procurement, and he brought me in and he set me off and running. And as soon as I got involved in one part of the business, I kind of began to poke my nose into all parts of the business. And it was part of his kind of growth spurt. He started off at 3 million, pushed it on to 15 million. And as you go through that process, there's all sorts of things that hit you from a business point of view that I ended up getting involved in. And kind of, I've just gone from there. My sister joined the business in 2004. She came to do a summer job after uni, and I never let her leave. She's always been my wing woman, Steph, because she's 7 years younger than me, but because we are sisters, we kind of think alike. We know, we kind of almost have that telepathic understanding of what needs to happen and how things need to be done. And then unfortunately, Dad passed away in 2018. And, we moved on from we both inherited the shares equally, and we've taken on the business as joint owners. And I'm MD, she's business support director. We run the business with 2 other directors, divisionally, Mike Foy and Steve Green. And that's kind of a potted history of the business.
How proud are you that you've taken on his legacy? Because I presume it was his baby, he's grown it, and then you've come in and you've revolutionised it in the last 5 years. You probably won't say that, but you have. And how important is it that you continued his legacy? Because it's got tough these last few years.
I use my maiden name at work. I am married, don't let anybody know, but actually Mansell isn't the real name. But when it's your family name above the door, that pride element, it's absolutely everything. Yeah. Because when it is your name above the door, it means a lot. It stands for something, and reputationally and morally, that it's like you're putting yourself out there personally in a business kind of context, because it does matter. Yeah. A conversation I had, must be a good sort of, 18 months, 2 years ago, was one way I look at it is that it's almost like owning a family business, especially when it passes down the generations, 2nd and 3rd generation. The way I look at it is it's like a relay race, and my dad did his lap of the park and he's passed me the baton, and I'm now doing my lap. But you do your own lap in your own unique way. You do it in your own time. You do it in your own style, especially if it's a 400-meter relay. It's like we had different ways of doing things, but we're still part of the same team. So it's kind of it is that legacy piece. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and just talk us through the sectors you now operate in. I mean, it might have always been the same, but just give us an idea of what sectors you operate in.
Well, I think this is one of our challenges, and this is it will lead into our conversations later on. So we've always been known for dry lining, and where dry lining packages take you is into sort of infill SFS. So again, for the audience that's out there that might not be too technically minded, it's plastering and petitions, and then part of the external wall construction in higher rise concrete frame and steel frame buildings. And we've operated in the dry lining space across multi-sectors. But what we've now done is set up a factory and used some of those products and some of the way we've been building over the last 30 years. You can actually apply exactly the same stuff that we've always done. You can use those products partly in a factory-based system, and you can produce panels in a factory, and then we still finish some of our work on site. So we're kind of off-site, on-site. The beauty of us is we've got one foot in both camps. Yeah. And in terms of the sectors that our panelised, our systemised build operates in, it's pretty much anything that's repetitive. So it's multi-occupancy, 2 to 3 stories we can go up to 14, but our sweet spot is probably 2 to 3 stories up to about 8 to 9 stories is where we see most of our success. So it's if your building fits into, if your sector fits into that type of building. So you will see apartments, you'll see care homes, student accommodation, hotels is the kind of the main sectors that use our system.
Amazing. And the business, because you said you hated the word subcontractor. How did you describe yourself? Because I know you do work with, in partnership, other contractors, and that's an important part of your world. But how would you describe yourself in that world?
So, we're the doers. And I'm part of the Safe Construction Initiative with, a number of really, really supportive people. Zoe Brooke, who's ex-Whitfield and Brown, has really turned the focus on, skills and procurement and what all that looks like and what that means to kind of the construction industry. And I think for me, the biggest piece is this whole idea of master and servant, of main contractor and subcontractor, because that is what the contracts deem us as. In reality, main contractors build very little. They rely on their supply chain of specialists like us to actually create those buildings. So I prefer the term specialist contractor. And part of my message out there to property and construction is we should be involved and engaged at all levels as early as possible. And our specialisms should be valued. Our specialisms should be brought to the fore. The supply chain does not get the most value out of the key parts of it. So I've started on a journey of trying to engage not just with our client base who are main contractors, but also engaging with the consultants that influence what happens on site. So architects, engineers, planning consultants, and everybody in between, and then going up to the client. As much as maybe main contractors are a little bit wary about their specialising base almost going over the head, it should be actively encouraged because people in this space, let's say, if we're building an apartment block and we're working with, a housing association or an RP, it's really important that we have those connections with that RP and they're as invested in that building as we are. So Agreed. For me, it's kind of a top to bottom approach. And I think it's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest with you, not only do I agree, but when we talk about quality, clearly, if you pick the wrong specialist contract, we all know how that can end. So I think it's really important. How do you forge those relationships? Like, how have you found it? And how important is it that you've got the right relationships and the right partnerships with contractors and providers?
I think the reality is, I think anybody who thinks about property and construction, about being the building, and the whole focus is about the building, they're missing the point. Property and construction is business and business is people. So my business, it is a collective of people, my staff, but they're people. My supply chain is a collective of businesses, but they're all people, clients, like main contractors. Some of our key sort of contractors that we're working with at the moment, particularly linked in with ICM framework and RP kind of stuff, would be the likes of Seddon, would be Rowlinsons. Hargreaves are quite new to the marketplace, but we're working with Hargreaves. Those kinds of businesses, they're all people, and ultimately, as I picked up the baton on my relay race, what I realised was construction tends to be really, really reactive. So, businesses don't really engage until something goes wrong. And to me, that seems absolutely bonkers. You wouldn't conduct any other part of your life like that. So why would you go to work and do that? So one of my first things I started to do was pick up the phone to kind of directors of the businesses we were working with and just start to have this conversation that goes, look, we'd usually only meet when things were going wrong. And I think that's bonkers. Can we meet and start to understand both our businesses, our groups of people, our challenges? And I really want to understand how we can help. I genuinely am here as a specialist at the end of the supply chain to help everybody in that supply chain.
Yeah. How can we improve that then? Because surely the end client only benefits if they see more people in that value chain, i.e. like if they see, why can't we do joint bids and joint meetings with the end client to try and understand the best way to approach and solve solutions?
Well, interestingly, I actually think that that's what MMC, offsite, dare we even chuck volumetric into the mix? All of these words are used interchangeably like they're the same thing, but they're not. Yeah. But if we're going to begin to change the way we build and we're going to put some of it in a factory, then by definition, it forces that earlier engagement because you cannot build a building in a factory without having all of those parts around a table much sooner. So if you're making a decision to go down, I prefer the term, I do like the term MMC, modern methods of construction, but I think we can pick up on that and deconstruct that a little bit as we talk in a minute. But if you're gonna use some of these systemized builds, you have no choice but to engage earlier because I've got a factory, I've got a slot, I've got to be involved in the design process. I've got to be involved in the planning, the layout, the logistics. I've got to be involved in that whole site because in reality, you know, us and Seddons, as we've delivered on the Salford 5 sites for Derive, you know, we've done that in partnership. We've done a great big chunk of the superstructure. They've done all of the substructure. But without each other, that site doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? It's so true. And I mean, like, let's go on to MMC. I've got loads of stuff to ask you, but I think let's start there. MMC for me is banded. Everything's the same. People think MMC for some reason, I don't know why, and they go straight to volumetric. That's where they go. Why do you think that is? Because I like the word MMC. I think it's the right term for what we do. But there's so many complexities to it. So kind of, where do you see it fitting, MMC? And what do you think the benefits are to the end user of kind of like utilising MMC in their building process?
So I think everyone ends up focused on volumetric because somewhere along the line, and I don't know if some of this, again, it just come to my mind, I don't know if some of this has come through sort of public procurement strategies. And, you know, the whole legacy of BIM, you know, when BIM was mandated on all public sector projects and all of that stuff. There's this notion that by involving technology and involving kind of changing the way we do things, I remember when BIM was rolled out, people started to talk about buildings being like planes and buildings being like cars. And I think very quickly, if you're aligning this notion that a building is like a plane or a car, that's how very quickly the house becomes a volumetric thing, doesn't it? Because people are trying to turn it into a plane or a car. In reality, though, you know, a building will never be a plane or a car because it sits in one place. Yeah. And where it sits, and how it sits on that land and where that land is and what the topography is of that land and what the makeup of it, you know, what's under that land and all of those things influence the design of that building. What happens with cars and with planes is something completely different because, you know, the airports and all the infrastructure are designed around the, you know, the design of the plane. So when the A380, the double decker was launched, you know, Dubai Airport was built on the premise that, you know, all of Emirates aircraft could double decker aircraft could be serviced by that airport. So the infrastructure matched the plane. We're not in that space in property and construction. And I don't think we'll ever be in that space in property and construction in the UK, because by the very nature, we're an island. There's loads of people live here. It's very condensed and we don't have a lot of land. So we have to be really, really smart and clever about what land we use and then how we build on it. I can see how volumetric and how, you know, a house coming out of a factory might be relevant in sort of, you know, swathes of America and even Australia and, you know, some of these areas where there are huge tracts of land, but we don't have the luxury of that over here. No. So if you kind of take that a step on, that's not to say that you can't build a house in a factory. That's not to say you can't be smarter about what you do. So one of the terms I've started to talk to people about is deconstructed volumetric. Yeah. So for me, what are the really great bits about volumetric, and how right now, as a property and construction sector, can we apply those really good bits to just how we're building now? The end result might well be that we will have some volumetric in our space, and where we're building big housing estates, and listen, the potential next Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced yesterday about, Labour's new towns. Apparently they're going to build millions of homes. When we're doing that, there might be space for volumetric.
Of course.
But when you're building on brownfield garage sites in the middle of Greater Manchester, it's got its challenges. But if you deconstruct volumetric, what it does is it's systemizing a build. There is a way you're going to build that house, and you're going to run it through a factory. Now, running things through factories and doing everything in a factory is really, really expensive. So some of the questions are asked about cost, aren't they? But factories are really expensive to run. I've got one. It's not massive. So you have to optimize what you do in it and what you don't do in it. Because if you try to do too much, that's where your cost base absolutely starts to shoot through the roof. Plus, then you're interfacing with a site that someone owns, a main contractor has set a prelim up on it, and it's ready to go. My logic is, why not do some stuff in a factory and finish the rest of it on a site, which is free? Because if we're trying to optimize a build and we're trying to fit into budgetary constraints, which we can't get away from, then we have to kind of just be a bit smarter. So for me, take the best bits of systemizing a volumetric build, do some of it in a factory, do some of it on a site, and that is the baby steps towards maybe part of what we end up delivering in 10, 15 years' time. That might end up volumetric. Some of it might stay as a panelised system, and there'll always be a place for traditional build, because we've got heritage and we've got loads of buildings that need taking care of. And we will continue to build traditionally in some areas and do some things. So I think it's a kind of suite of everything that we need.
I agree. And I think when people, sometimes they're obviously biased towards the thing that they're delivering. So the thing that I always think with volumetric, and I've been involved in a lot of volumetric startups and scale-ups, is that you're taking a lot of the value out of the process for everyone. So the contractor doesn't get anything out of it. So why would they be invested in it? The client doesn't get different ideas and different people. So you end up in this weird place where the factory doesn't have enough volume, you don't have enough orders coming in, and you don't know what you need to do to next. Whereas the thing I think with 2D is it's worked for millions, like for years. It's not a new thing. People think it only happened 6 years ago. It's been going on for years and years and years. But I think at least then, like you said about your partnerships, you're not taking revenue and work off Seddons and other contractors because you can work with them.
Well, if you're really realistic, if you look at the vertical supply chain from client all the way down to specialist of how we deliver a construction project, there's that many bodies in the chain. I mean, before I used to kind of just stop at the main contractor and leave it at that. But when you look at the consultant space and who's involved in a project, when you look at, then the client down and the main contractor, it's like we're quite entrenched in the UK though as well. And in effect, volumetric is asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. Which part of the chain is going to bow out and go, do you know what? We'll step back, you lot crack on, and we'll fall away here. No one's going to do that. So what you need to do is, instead of you've got to work with what you've got rather than trying to push against it. I know people talk about disruption and, we need to disrupt the market. To me, in the property and construction market, you don't disrupt it from the outside, you disrupt it from within. And I'm trying to take people in my own small way, in my own small part, hold people's hands, take them on a journey, build up a circle of trust between the parties involved, and deliver something a bit different.
Yeah, and that's a key word in our sector, isn't it? Trust. It's like, I liken it to AI. Everyone's AI is going to take all of our jobs. It's not a good starting point for AI, is it? Because everyone starts to resist it. It's the same with volumetric. This is going to change the industry and we won't need traditional anymore. That's not the right narrative.
No, it isn't. Absolutely not. So then going back to your point about terminology, I deem what we do, there's elements of deconstructed volumetric, so systemizing a build. We are miles away from standardizing a build. When I look at the marketplace at the moment, everybody's talking about standardized house types, but that's in their own organizations. Everybody needs their own USP to deliver what it is they're delivering.
Agreed.
So, one RP's standardized house type is very different to the next RP's. One main contractor's version of what they want to do versus another's is completely different, and rightly so. That is the point of difference. That is what they're trying to deliver in the marketplace. So what you need is something that is flexible enough to allow for all of that, but that still can systemize what we're doing. So standardization, it almost takes you back to Henry T. Ford, doesn't it? And you can have any model, you can have any color as long as it's black. Well, our world don't want that. It wants more flexibility. So MMC, for me, modern methods of construction, everyone focuses on the modern piece and the technology. And in reality, as I started this piece with you, none of the products that we use in any of the builds are any different to anything that we've been using on site for the last 30 years. So this idea that there is some dark art, there's some weird and wonderful science to what's happening with MMC, honestly, people need not worry. People need to just
the same thing.
Take a step back and go, it's the same thing that has been done. So if you lived in an apartment in city centre Manchester, you're wrapped in these products anyway. And if you bought it 20 years ago, we built left bank apartments with AMEC that was the burst open of sort of spinning fields in our dry lining days. Those people are wrapped in this technology now. Yeah. I can use those products to build a house tomorrow. There is no difference. And you could be sat in Newton Heath in that house. There's no difference.
Yeah. How do we educate the world? Because I think sometimes jargon wraps people up in this dark arts of MMC, but actually there's not anything, like you say, that innovative, and it's the same stuff. But how can we educate the clients, the RPs, the marketplace, the end user? The one thing I get with, the end user is, I don't want to live in a prefab house, and it's not that. Obviously, that's the thing. But how do we educate the market and get those messages out there better?
For me, it's again the people, and everyone in this chain is a person, so it's relationships, and it's as simple as it's show and tell. It's come and have a look. Our factory's open. If you want to come and have a look at what we're doing, if you want to come and visit one of our sites, I can show you marketing literature till I'm blue in the face. If you want to come and see it, you want to come and touch it, you want to come and feel it, come in and have a look. If you want to bring some of your clients in with you, as an RP, if you want to bring some of your day-to-day clients, bring them in, come and have a look at what we're doing, engage with it. And I think that's where you start that kind of understanding.
No, I agree. And as we look at kind of some of the ways that this has been delivered, talk to us a bit about the Seddon situation. We had Peter Jackson on the podcast, and you've got the Salford 5, is that right?
Yeah, Salford 5 sites for Derive. So we are about to start the 5th site with them. So you've got Clifton Avenue, Ryle Avenue, Clifton Green, the former St Luke's, Irwell Valley, and Longshore Drive is about to go. So our involvement with Seddon on those sites has been building the apartment blocks. So whilst we have a housing solution, we have not moved into the space. We've delivered some private development houses. We've delivered some townhouses in Solihull with a private developer, but we have not developed or delivered any houses as yet in this space. What we are delivering successfully is apartment blocks. On all of those 5 sites, all of those apartment blocks are built out of Category 2, OSHA. It wasn't through OSHA, but Category 2, light gauge steel panelised systems. And with the learns across the sites, what we've been able to do is demonstrate continuous improvement. We've been able to demonstrate how to overcome some of the challenges and ensure that we can reach passive house standards, because in applying these products and systems, you're going to get a better result on the kind of the carbon piece, which is obviously in terms of air leakage and all the things that we're trying to do around carbon for the end user to keep those bills low and minimal. With metal, and insulation, you stand a better chance of being able to keep that air tightness there, which is what is delivering on your passive house. And, we've been through a learning curve with Seddons, but part of that kind of joined up partnership thinking is, well, you learn as you go and you learn as you go together, don't you? And you don't always get everything right. And when I say you don't get everything right, what that means is the client still ends up with the right building. It just means it costs us all money to learn as we've gone.
Of course.
But, I'm really sort of thankful. Again, I started a relationship with Peter by picking up the phone to him. And it's just like, can we have a chat? Yeah, I'm interested in what you've got to say. I think there's something in it. We've got challenges around resource, because some of this is also borne out with the fact, remember, that we've got a huge skill shortage in construction. So if we don't stop building traditionally or stop building some of it traditionally, we're going to have a problem, because you won't be able to deliver the volume. We haven't got enough brickies. We haven't got enough of the traditional trades. It takes too long to train people from a pool of people that don't want to do it anyway. We've got to turn it into something else so that you are bringing through a different pool of people. And I'm very focused on process training people. I want to train them in a process rather than a trade. I want to give them multi-skills. And then through those multi-skills, there's progression within our business. So that's the real opportunity. And Peter saw something in that. And we've kind of developed a thinking and a partnership and an understanding on Seddon Housing Partnership side of the business. And I can now see forward pipeline with Peter. And again, joined up thinking as I start to talk to more architects, and you start to form a bit of a triangle, and then you get collaboration, and then you move through. And that to me is what our industry really should be all about.
Yeah, and you've said it a few times, and I wanted to just pick up on it. Trust, people, relationships, like really key to you.
Yeah.
Have we lost sight of that as a society around hiding behind email and and not just picking the phone up and having a good old conversation? Have we lost a bit of that, do you think?
Absolutely. I think we have. I'd much rather have a phone conversation than if need be, follow it up with an email. Do you know what I mean?
But it's like,
that's all it needs. I
bet your dad didn't have many email back and forth on contracts, and you haven't done it. Was just a conversation. Look, some of them will have been heated, but they'll have got things done and fixed, and it needs to go back a little bit to that, I think.
And I also think post-pandemic, there's nothing better than, not face-to-face meetings for the sake of it, but there's nothing better than reading somebody's body language, looking somebody in the eye, and just having that human connection, and that's how you start to build trust. What is it? 97% of what we say and what we mean is non-verbal. Yeah. So if you're not actually meeting people, you're never going to build those relationships. And therefore, you're never going to build that trust. And trust is a two-way street. You've got to I've got to trust what someone says for them to pay it back, for them to trust me.
Of course.
And that's how you build it. But you have to just start somewhere is kind of where I see it.
Yeah, no, agreed. Just wanted to pick up the housing stuff. You're obviously a leading voice in Greater Manchester and all things Manchester, but specifically around working with social landlords to solve the housing crisis. And you mentioned Keir Starmer. I read it this morning. Yeah. What do you see as some of the blockers, and what can we do more of to solve the housing crisis in your opinion?
Well, I mean, you hear all sorts. Clearly, money and the system, planning in particular is what you hear all the time, don't you? Yeah. But, rising costs, issues over getting sites through to planning, they're obviously key challenges. I think one of my kind of frustrations, again, I see, appraising a site and understanding whether it stacks up, that seems to me to be a bit of a dark art. And I think there could be and should be more than one way of looking at that. I think some of those appraisals, to me, again, I don't know enough about it. I will stand corrected after this podcast if anyone wants to have a conversation. They're very formulaic, and, I'm not sure that they fully look at the right things. One of my concerns at the minute is we're bashing square pegs into round holes. We're building traditionally, largely, timber frame with brick. Yeah. Is that MMC? Is it traditional? What is that? But we're building, and, we're building just to meet building regs. And in effect, all we're doing is building the retrofits of the future. So when we're appraising sites, no one's factoring in, but what's that going to cost me in 10 or 20 years' time? Whereas if we spent a bit more now, you'd avoid a lot of that. And I think that longer term piece is part of my frustration. I also think, because things are coming through planning piecemeal, what we need as a business is pipeline. We can build 1,000 homes a year in Bolton. My mantra is local homes for local people by local people. If our factory can produce 1,000 homes and we're sat in Bolton, and Bolton at Home are building 300 homes a year, how can I make it that Bolton at Home build the bulk of what they're doing in our factory if it suits? If it's only half, because they still need to build half of them traditionally, fine. But then how do I move around the dial? I see Manchester as like, it's a circle, isn't it? So in that upper quadrant, how do I make Wigan come down the same route with me because they're the next borough along? And how do I make Salford part of that journey? Those 3 boroughs alone should be filling my factory. And once my factory's full and is optimised, my aspiration would be blueprint, do exactly the same and pick another quadrant, go over and do it in Tameside and feed that side of Greater Manchester. I don't think super factories sat out in the middle of Yorkshire where land is cheap is the answer. I don't think that gives back to the community in any way, shape or form. Because what our business does, being sat in the heart of the community and looking to change the way we build, I'm creating jobs, I'm creating opportunities for people, for that very community. I have this idea that I'd love for some of the guys and girls, because the other side of systemising and process driving a build is we're including 50% of the population now that we've excluded because the work's heavy, the work's dirty. If you change the way you build, it makes it more inclusive for women to get involved. And there are loads of young girls and young females who want to get involved in construction. So if you make it easier and more accessible for them to do that, we've got a couple of young ladies out on site who are spray plastering and spray finishing. We're teaching them how to do that. And we've got we've got Molly in the factory. But for me, my aspiration would be Molly would be building the panels that went out to create homes in Bolton that either her or a kind of, extended family might actually go and live in. How great would it be if you were part of building your own home?
Yeah, and I think there's not enough talked about this, about local skills for local work, for local people that live in a home. Because actually, when you think about it, it's really hard. You'll know this yourself because you'll still recruit qualified trades people in your business. The skills are getting less and less and less. We've got a definite aging workforce that eventually will retire, and there's not a lot coming through the other side, in my opinion. And therefore, the one thing that I've always bought in with MMC is we don't need to always recruit tradespeople. We can give jobs to local young people that want to get involved in a skill. It doesn't need to be a trade, just a skill. But I think the only way we'll solve that is through factories. And I actually agree that I think they need to be smaller, scalable factories for the local community. And that's the way to scale that model up.
I mean, and absolutely. And to me, I was born in Stockport. I'm from South Manchester. I want to do what we're doing in Greater Manchester. I've got no aspirations to I don't want to be shipping out what we do to Birmingham. Because I want, it's the greatest, I live in the greatest city in the world. I want to keep it here. Yeah. But there's no reason why the blueprint of what we're doing couldn't be repeated across the great sort of urban centres across the UK. Every London borough should have a factory doing what we're doing, really, if you think about it. I've not got the rights to it. There isn't, again, I think part of what goes on in this sector is everyone's getting quite hung up on IP. And actually, it's a nonsense. Yeah. We're using the products anyway. There isn't IP on what we're doing on construction sites. There isn't IP really on what you're doing in factories. But there is an optimized way to do it. So, people should get on my bus and be doing what I'm doing. Some have, there's some have taken it further than we have, put more on a panel in a factory. The guys over in on the Wirral at Starship, they're doing something similar, but they've taken things onto the kind of the next level, and that's what's working for them, and that's the way they see it. But they can do houses, they can't currently build apartments and multiple occupancy stuff. So again, had some interesting conversations with some of other category 2 people in our space, because more often than not, you'll find there's collaboration in there.
Yeah,
We all need to work together.
we do, and I wonder how the government or how we can make it so that people buy local first, because it's surely got to be the way we got. Like, why is it that everything's imported, and why is it that everything's built by these massive companies all over the country when we've got local businesses like yours, and we're saying the pipeline's not full? It should be full. It should be bursting at the seams, the factory at the moment, shouldn't it? Given the need.
And to be fair, it's stop-start, and the beauty of our model is at the minute, and this is why volumetric, big scale will be challenged if it's not got the pipeline going through it. At least if we have a 2 or 3 week shutdown, we mobilise that workforce, and because of the skills they've got, they can go out onto site and do some of the on-site stuff. Yeah. So our model has longevity in it. That isn't my aspiration. I don't want to be sending people who work in a factory out to site. But you know what? Right now, the beauty is that I can.
Yeah. No, it's good. How important has this journey been to share with your sister? I wanted to talk a bit about diversity. Obviously, you don't see many females running decent-sized organisations in our sector where you're a specialist contractor fighting your own path. But how important has it been that you share it with your sister? And I suppose, how important has it been to be really strong and be able to have an opinion in this sector? Because clearly, it must have been difficult at times. I know you put a brave face on it, but it must have been quite difficult at times.
Well, because I got involved in Dad's business in 2002, I'm now 21 years in.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And I think when I first started, I think that's where, I think there was this double-edged sword of being a woman entering into construction. You feel like you've got a lot to prove. And then I had the extra layer of, I was the boss's daughter. So I had another set of stuff to prove. And I think in my early days, so in my mid-20s, I was quite hard. I was quite tough, and people knew that that's what I was. I think over the course of time, those hard edges have kind of softened. Listen, as you go through life, as you have kids and you have all of your life experiences, it does change you. I've mellowed, and people who know me might think, oh my goodness, if that's what mellow is, what was she like 20 years ago? But I think you just get to a place where you're comfortable with yourself. And I think a really good word and a really important word is authenticity. It's about being authentic to yourself. It's about being who you are. And it's about, saying what you think in the right way to the right audience. Yeah. So, I think, in terms of, I also think women do think about things differently. They approach things differently, and I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying it's different. And I think that is partly the point of diversity, is actually different people approach things differently, and to have a group of different people round a table, and in particular a board table, is a really, really good thing to have, because it just gives you different perspective, different experience. And, you will get to a different answer. If it's always middle-aged men in grey suits sat around that boardroom, you're going to talk about the same stuff and get the same answer potentially. So if you change that, you will start to come up with different answers. So change nothing changes. So if you want change, you need diversity.
Yeah, and I can't imagine you've sat in many boardrooms in this industry with other female leaders. That's the stark reality of this, isn't it?
Yeah, although there's more and more and more.
It's getting better.
It is getting better. One of our key supply chain who supply us, so CCF, who are part of the Travis Perkins group, Catherine Gibson is their MD, and I have regular meetings with her. So you're seeing it more in product. I do follow people on LinkedIn, in terms of, there are more and more and more. Last week I was at the National Federation of Builders, and I was fortunate enough to have been named one of their top 100 most influential women in construction. But there, by default, there was another 99 women in that room with me.
Yeah, which is wicked.
Which is absolutely, and it should be celebrated, because it's a really important journey. I want to get to a point where we don't need to have those awards and that recognition longer.
That'd be the ideal. That'd be the ideal. But I think as well, like from my perspective, like there's industries get it right, including RPs and HAs. A lot of the leaders in those businesses are female.
Yeah.
I think there's too much stigma attached to construction. When I speak to young people, graduates that want to go into a new sector, would I be all right in construction? So there's still that stigma attached to it, and we've got to debunk that quickly, haven't we, if we're going to get to where we want to get to?
Absolutely. And it's about making it accessible and open. I think that's the key thing. You know, I certainly know that Ellie and Liv who are working on construction sites for us at the moment, one of their frustrations is it's the simple stuff like the ladies' loo's always locked because the men can't be trusted not to use it and leave it a mess. You know, so every time they need to go to the loo, they have to go in to the cabin and ask for the key, and usually they're asking a man for the key. Yeah,
but I'm sick to death though of, and I know you started this, and that was the 80s, 90s, 2000s, but of women saying, "I'll do a procurement job or a QS." No, like, but realistically, all avenues should be open. That's the thing.
Listen, I think certainly, you know, planners, people who are programming, sequencing, and people who are running sites did benefit from a bit more female influence.
They would, a bit of organisational skill, I think. So as we look forward and you and Steph plan the next 5-10 years, what are you excited about? I know we haven't quite talked about the talent and the local talent piece as much, but what are some of the things that you're really looking to do, and what are some of the things that you want to, you say, be the change that you want to see? What are some of the things you'd love to see in the Manchester area, and specifically, I suppose, with Mansell?
Well, I mean, sort of, you've always got a 5-year plan, and it's a rolling 5-year plan. You know, one of our key things at the moment is filling our factory, you know, and as much as that, it's an aspiration because it's not happening at the minute. Yeah. I'd love to fill the factory then to be able to optimise and get as much efficiency out of it as we possibly can, so that we might be able to build 1,200 homes, we might be able to build 1,400 homes out of Horwich. But until we've got that pipeline, then that's one of the challenges. So what I'm really looking forward to is building more relationships like the ones we've begun to build with some of those key clients that I mentioned before. Yeah. I really like people. I'm really engaged with people. I'm interested in perspective, in different ideas. So I'm excited about working with more people in the way that we started to work with those contractors. I am also, you know, I'm keen to ensure that the social value piece is something that is woven through and is enabled by those partnerships and by those clients. Because it all goes hand in glove. The more that we're able to sort of do within the factory, the more then we're able to involve communities and create jobs, and almost create this blueprint. You know, I don't know whether I want to own these factories, but I'd like to see 3 or 4 more of what we're doing around Greater Manchester. And I'm excited by the prospect of making one work and then being able to set up 3 or 4 more. Because then if you've got 4 factories that can produce 5,000 homes a year, you're well on your way to beginning to unlock and deliver on what we need. You know, I often think about, and again, this is part of the unspoken piece when we're appraising sites, isn't it? But, you know, there are people at the moment that are sat in temporary accommodation that have got a huge housing need. You know, there's a mother, a father, a couple of kids in 1 or 2 rooms if you're lucky. How much is that costing? What's it doing to their mental health? What's that costing society? So therefore, what is the true cost of not building a home for them to live in? So the idea that you can begin to influence and make sure that, you know, that people have got the right start, that have got, you know, a roof over their heads and have got a home to go to every night. You know, that's one of the basics, isn't it, in life?
Should be.
So you can start to influence some of that. That's where you'll start to unlock some really good things.
Yeah, and it's a good way to end. I think I agree totally. I think there's some of the bits that I'm seeing at the moment, it's homelessness is getting worse, which means the housing needs getting worse, which means we're going to have an interception somewhere from government in order to solve some of the challenges. And I think the solution that Mansell have got firstly, for me, it has to be supplementary and additive to the rest of the sector, which it is. And secondly, can solve quite a big issue, which we've got in scalability of skills, which we haven't got in this current environment. I love how passionate you are about Manchester. Honestly, like there's no one in my network that I think is more passionate about Manchester than you are. And I hope that you do get to fill the factory and other factories. And even if they're not owned by you, I hope that you get to be involved in that plan in the future, because I think we've got to come together, and we're bloody good at that in Manchester. We are good at coming together, and we've got a great culture.
Yeah.
But we're quick to go elsewhere to buy in our products from other areas. We need to bring it in locally and support our local communities better.
And finishing on the word that, you know, is sort of run through us talking this afternoon, James, you know, that is about trusting. It's about trusting yourself, trusting each other, and knowing that, you know, what we've got in Greater Manchester, it's enough. And, you know, we can do this.
Yeah. Amazing way to finish. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No worries. Thanks.
See you later.
See you later.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Hip. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.